Hello everyone, and welcome back to Powerful Nothing, a Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, known on the internet as 2SweetMTG, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host. I'm joined by my co-host James. How's it going, dude? Are you well?
Yeah, pretty good.
Awesome. We have a fun episode for everyone today. So much fun, in fact, that we couldn't do it alone. Today, we're joined by a friend of the show, Josh, known online as FiretruckModo. Josh, welcome back to Powerful Nothing. Good to have you here.
Hey, thank you.
Nice. Yeah, good to have you back on. It's been a hot minute. You're actually on one of the earliest episodes where we went over Power Cube. Today, we're going to be talking about another powerful topic. Today, we're going to be talking about Storm in Cube. And Josh, as a Storm aficionado, we thought it'd be good to get you on and get your insights into one of the most powerful, but definitely harder to play archetypes out there. There will be time codes down below if people want to jump around. But before we get on to our main topic, which is Storm in Cube, we want to touch on a little bit of news. Probably the main thing to touch on is a rather large and expected in most cases anyway, banned and restricted announcements. A lot of people have already given their insights onto it already, but we thought as we had one of the winningest vintage players in all of Europe joining us today, we thought it's probably worth digging down into the ban and restricted announcement specifically for vintage. So for vintage, Urza's Saga was restricted and Vexing Bauble was restricted. Now, as someone who kind of tangentially sees a bit of vintage, I talk to you about it every now and then, and the wife plays it. I'm assuming as a Bazaar of Baghdad player, you're kind of happy with at least Vexing Bauble being restricted. But just talk to me about these, Josh, and how do you feel it affects the format overall?
To be honest, it was pretty shocking. I wasn't expecting it. The format was in a good place. The Saga restriction I thought was wild, to be honest with you. It forced everyone to think about the battlefield, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Because typically people didn't have to. Like if you go back in time, the decks would have 1-2 bolts in the deck across the 75. Like things in play wasn't really a thing other than artifacts. So yeah, 1 or 2 lightning bolts and a Hercules recall, and most of the decks could operate, and that's how they interacted. But Saga actually changed that, made you have to think about how you play a wasteland, made you think how do you need like dress downs and this sort of thing. You look at the mono white decks before it got restricted, they were playing main deck March of Otherworldly Light, usually over a number of Swords to Plowshares. And March to Otherworldly Light is not a playable card. So that's just, I don't know, part of what Saga did. And it made people care about something that was different. So that was cool. I was actually surprised that went, because I didn't think it was necessarily that unhealthy to make vintage players care about something that's not the stack, if that makes sense. And then the bauble as well. So I've got 2 different takes on the bauble. As someone who plays a lot of Bazaar of Baghdad, it can go away, I don't care. Great to see it go, sort of thing. It's because I play a lot of Squee, and it completely invalidated that deck, right? So the Squee deck has got no mana producing lands, and it only casts pitch spells, and you generate card advantage by discarding Squee, Goblin and Bob, and Master of Death and getting them back later, and putting some creatures into play for free like Vengevine and Hollow One. So Vexing Bauble did just completely obliterate that deck. You can't play it. That side of things, I'm quite happy that it's been restricted. But what I also did was in the dark times when Bauble was unrestricted, I actually started playing the Lurrus Saga decks, which was the best deck in the format. And I started off with the main list, which had 4 baubles in it, and I kept dying behind my own baubles, because if you're playing a 4-6-8 Force of Will deck with 4 baubles in it, you play a bauble and then your opponent kills you. Yeah. And you can't force back. So actually, if you go and look at my like Goldfish results or something, I 4-2'd every challenge and missed on breakers on every challenge that I played Lurrus Saga. And by the last one, I just didn't play any baubles. So I just wasn't actually interested in having it in my deck. That was part of like a psyop though, because I thought if I play Lurrus Saga for a few months and decrease the number of baubles, at some point I'll get good with the deck and I'll start getting results. And then people will net deck me, play 0 baubles, and then hopefully I can play Squee. And if you time that right, it would land in across the Eternal Weekend season, right? So there was a bit of a
You're trying to game the
system.
system.
That's a long game you're playing. That
mega long game, but can I get good enough with Lurrus Saga to change the metagame enough to make Squee good? That was a bit of a long-term plan. But no, so I think like if it was up to me, like I understand why they did the bauble restriction. but I just don't think the card was good enough to get restricted. So it's a bit weird in that sense. And then the Saga restriction to me is just wild, but they can do what they want. I think that'd be my two takes.
Yeah, with the Vexing Bauble, I think that's more like I get the feeling with that is it's more just Vintage is the place where you can play all these broken free spells, and Vexing Bauble kind of stops you doing that, and it's probably not why they made the card. It's weird that they have banned Vexing or restricted Vexing Bauble and Saga in the same one, because obviously Saga can go find your Vexing Bauble, or could have. So
yeah, but if Vintage is a format where you do powerful things and sometimes you win and sometimes you die, and yes, there's maybe a higher variance format. Sometimes you die to Vexing Bauble, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? Like holistically from the format point of view, as I said before, with Squee being completely dead, I'm absolutely fine to see it get restricted. I don't know. I'm very split on it because I think it's wild, but I'm also very pleased. So yeah, I do understand it, because this is all the exact same reasoning they gave when they restricted Chalice a number of years ago as well. It's just it stops people from playing Moxen, so you deploy all of yours, you then play your Chalice on 0, and then you pass the turn, and your opponent can't deploy their Moxen, and you've got a 3-1 mana advantage going into turn 2 sort of thing. So it's all the same reasoning. I haven't gone back and looked at it, but from memory, it's close to copy and paste, to let people have fun, keeping the spirit of Vintage sort of thing. But I also
keeping people playing their expensive cards, I guess, as well.
Exactly, but I also think it could have been around longer. It could have drifted off. Like, I was more pleased with my Lurrus Saga decks when I didn't have baubles. But then Mogged, who's one of the best players on Magic Online platform, was, just running out there with 4 of them in his deck, sort of thing. So, I don't know. It was interesting. I think the Saga one's pretty shocking, and the bauble one I think is. Yeah, I think it's wild, but, I do understand the logic behind it. I just think they could have left it around a bit longer to see if it is actually good. Because I wasn't the only person trending down on it. There was other people who didn't think it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that kind of checks out. The Chalice was the card I was going to compare it to with, like, this Vintage to me didn't need another card that is busted on the play, kind of bad on the draw, and kind of determines the game on turn 1 with a 1-mana artifact, like, maybe it wasn't too good, but was it adding anything to the experience of playing Vintage, I guess, would have been my question.
No, I can't imagine it as adding to it really in any way. It's interesting from the point of view of the person who's playing the baubles and Force of Wills, right? It's just, if you come off of 1 mana, so you play bauble on 1, they don't do anything, you've got 3 Moxen or whatever. If you come off that 1 mana left over to crack the bauble, then you can't turn on your Force of Wills if they're doing something that's big and scary. On the other hand, though, if you do crack your bauble to force something, you've unlocked their Force of Wills as well. So, yeah, it was interesting, but it was just, I don't know, I feel like it was trending down and slowly on its way to a 0, 1, and 2. But I don't know, I'm happy with the changes, because I get to play cool decks again. I don't have to play Lurrus,
What decks are thriving now with this change? Like, I'm looking at MTG Goldfish, and
imagine it's. I mean, like, I think the main winners were like, well, Lurrus Saga's probably got to transform a bit, but the thing with Lurrus Saga is it's now very good at casting a Psychic Frog, right? Before, it was a Psychic Frog deck with 9 colorless lands in it, right, which is challenging at best. But you could get there a bit later on. So I think they actually gained a bit just because they've now got less colorless lands in their deck. I think Bug was a big winner as well. So like the Sultai mid-range deck, which is Deathrite Shamans and Leovolds and Orcish Bowmasters and just generally quite annoying cards. Forced Ancestral Walk, all this stuff. I think they're a big winner because they were already good against Shops and Dredge. And they didn't lose anything, nothing changed, sort of thing. They didn't play Saga, they didn't play Bauble. And Dredge gets a little bit better, sort of thing, because you can cast your Dredge spells. I think the big winner is Squee, but the downside of Squee is that everyone's now realised that they can play 5 strip mines in their deck, right, for wasting 1 strip, because strip mine's restricted as well.
Yeah.
Everyone's learned that they can actually play 5 strip mines in their deck, whereas if you go back before Saga, you would find these 2-3 color control decks with 0 to 1 wastelands in it, sort of thing, 0 to 1 strip mines in it. And if you're playing a tempo controlling style Bazaar deck, which you need to activate Bazaar 4 times to win a game, that's a lot harder when your Bazaar's dead, right? So I think Squeeze got better, but I also think deck construction's come a long way through the Saga years that it kind of binks on Squee a bit. So I don't know if Squeeze is going to be good. I think Dredge is very good. I think Doomsday is just still very good as well. Doesn't really lose anything. Yeah, I'm not sure actually what's at the top of the metagame at the moment, to be honest with you. I've not looked, but I'd imagine it looks like Saga, Dredge, and then Jewel. Sorry, Jewel was the big loser because it lost the baubles that it was playing and the 4 Sagas. But that
I guess the Sagas were just like the pretty potent backup plan, right? If you're playing dual shops.
Yeah. So game 2, when your opponent's trying to null rod you out of the board, you can go Saga Ancient Tomb, play all your Moxen, and your Moxen don't activate, but you've got some 10/10s. This is also fine. The thing with Saga is it also chooses the Manifold Key to get the Time Vault combo going. But it's one of those things as well where the deck's so good at just ploughing through 30 cards in a turn that it won't be hard for them to adapt and just pick up a different win condition, right? It already played Khan. It's going to continue playing the Saga. Those 2 are fine. And PO, Time Vault Key. I don't know. I don't think you need too many more kill conditions, but you can probably find some.
No, makes sense. Well, yeah, just looking at the numbers, and this is just as of the 4th of September, Dredge is currently top. Apparently it's 24% of the meta. So
I got a Dredge trophy the other day, and I've got a video coming out of a Dredge trophy on the 5th of September. Honestly, 5-0, 10-0 through a Magic League, and literally nothing went wrong the whole league. To the point that there was a Bazaar game where I kept 7 with a Bazaar of Baghdad. My opponent puts Leyline into play, and I was just holding 2 Vigors and 2 green cards, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll just kill your Leyline and you'll die." It was it's land speed record for 5 rounds of Magic. I did it in under an hour. Unbelievable. Really funny.
I'm actually looking at the Vintage Mish game. I clicked on Dredge. Your name is here under 5-0 player 5.
Easiest 5-0 of my life. Just. And I was trying to commentate on it. I just had nothing to say. I was like, so what I did here is just tap my land and my opponent's died. I don't know. It's one of those ones where it's no not interesting, right? But no difficult spots to think through. Just dredged them hard and dredged them good. Very funny though. Yeah, Dredge is on top. That's quite cool.
I'm always fine talking about Dredge on top. But it is time, gents. We should move on. Let's go from one busted deck in Dredge, talking about another busted deck. Let's talk about Storm in Cube. So the aim of today is we're going to give an overview of the archetype, how it plays, what it's trying to do, and how you can build the deck and add it to your own cube. So I'm going to throw this to you first, Josh, if that's okay. Let's just pretend like I am someone who has never played Storm before and has no idea what they're doing with the Tendrils of Agony. I know, hard to imagine. Can you give me a high-level overview of what the Storm deck is and what it's trying to do, just as a starting point for our conversation today?
Fundamentally, you're trying to cast a lot of spells in one turn, and then the final spell of the game of your big turn will be a payoff, typically with the Storm mechanic, which copies that spell for each spell we've cast before that. So typically that will come in the form of casting a number of fast mana accelerants, like Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, Rite of Flame, Lotus Petal, Lion's Eye Diamond, this sort of thing. Black Lotus, obviously the best one of all time. And then after that, you'll cast some intermediary spells, and you'll finish off with something like Tendrils, Brain Freeze. There's a new card in the Mitigo Cube, the dragon making thing, Empty the Warrens, something with Storm, and then you replicate that spell for each spell before it, and then hopefully that wins.
Yeah, no, that totally checks out. I think Storm decks tend to play quite strangely in that we often don't cast very many spells for the first 2 or 3 turns of the game, which normally is not a recipe for winning games of Magic in Cube, but with Storm decks it can be. That's
yeah.
definitely I feel like when people don't tap mana for 4 turns, but initially I'm happy, and then I'm like, oh, maybe found Storm. I better kill them very quickly.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where the Storm decks usually almost always are like critical mass decks, right? So it's good to wait as long as you can to as close to the turn before you lose as possible. Then you would have seen the most cards, you've got the most options, you've got the most info, and that way you can plot the most effective and efficient turn as well, to cast all your spells, basically. So sometimes you just have the nutso hands where you can just go, oh, my opponent's tapped their lands, I've got everything I need, off you pop, sort of thing. But yeah, typically you're not doing too much, just filtering, cantripping, and then, the odd push and bolt here and there, and then having a big turn a bit later on.
No, that makes sense. I think one thing I think I want to drill down on, you mentioned there, is in that, when you were giving the overview, you did mention a lot of powerful cards, shall we say. Like, you mentioned the words Black Lotus. Obviously, I've only seen Black Lotus in, like, vintage powered cubes, but I'm assuming Storm isn't just available in vintage. Like the payoffs are, I think a lot of them, like Tendrils is an uncommon. Like what kind of cubes can we see Storm appear in?
The thing is, right, is that, yeah, Tendrils, Brain Freeze, a lot of the Storm kill cards, so Empty the Warrens, Grape Shot, these are all commons and uncommons. So you can play those in your Peasant and Pauper cubes if you want to. But you'd probably have to make quite a package that works. The rituals as well are all commons, maybe uncommons. Like, so the 4 red rituals, right? Rite of Flame, Desperate, Pyretic, and Seething Song. I think they're all common off the top of my head. Dark Ritual and Cabal Ritual are common and uncommon. So you can probably fit something in there. The thing that's the Peasant and Pauper cubes, those, I guess, quote unquote, lower power level cubes would lose, would be the big splashy spell that lets you cast everything again. So like Past in Flames, Underworld Breach, Yawgmoth's Will, they're all going to be res. So that's kind of problematic if you're trying to build a package into those cubes. So I imagine it's going to be something like a Legacy-esque cube forwards would be the one where you can get all of the normal package. But that said, there might be some sort of regrowth effect out there somewhere that I can't think of right now that allows it in Peasant Cube. What's that pair of lost dice? What's that? Is that a common or uncommon?
Pero Dice Lost. 3 green for a roll of 2 6-sided dice. Return a number of cards with total mana value. X or less from your graveyard to your hand, where X is the total of those results. Exile Pero Dice Lost.
What rarity is that?
That is an uncommon.
Yeah, so it's basically a Yawgmoth's Will for your Peasant Cube.
Sounds kind of tough, but I'd be down to try it.
It sounds tough, but I don't know. But like, you only need 1 or 2 more effects like that to consider it something close to a package, right? I don't know if it could be supported at that level, but yeah, I think Legacy up.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of space between like Pauper and Peasant cubes and Powered cube, right?
Yeah, and I think it depends on how you bracket it as well, right? Because if you say a modern cube, then you lose like Yawgmoth's Will, Brain Freeze, Tendrils of Agony, right? So I think it depends on. There's going to be space in between in power level terms, but I think in the traditional way cubes are split up in like Pauper, Peasant, and I guess like Set, Modern, Legacy, Vintage. I don't know where the bracket would be, but I think I could make a Peasant cube Storm deck, but it wouldn't be Modern legal. So I don't know. Yeah, but I think the higher power level your cube is, the more easy it's going to be for it to support Storm. I think would be a fairly simple way of putting it. Actually, a lot of words to say, make it more powerful, and then Storm will work.
I think the reason it's so commonly associated with Powered Cube, particularly, right, is that Storm uses those ultra powerful cards better than any other deck, basically.
Yes.
You put a Black Lotus in your red-green deck, it's like, sometimes I have Black Lotus in my opening hand, and that kind of gets me a free win, assuming I don't have a removal spell for my Great 4-drop or whatever.
My Questing Beast.
Exactly. But Black Lotus in a Storm deck like transforms the whole deck, right? Because you're not just casting your Black Lotus once, you're like tutoring for your Black Lotus and then casting it multiple times in a turn.
Yeah, I think you could probably build a package anything, but the more powerful your cube is as a baseline, I think your Storm deck's going to operate and be easier to put together.
Cool. Right. So let's keep drilling down into this deck a little. So to generate the large Storm count that we need to make casting these Storm payoffs worthwhile. We need access to a lot of cards and also the mana to cast them in a single turn. James, I'll throw this to you first. What do you think are some of the best mana engines, ways of making mana in these Storm decks?
Yeah, so this is often like the sticking point for Storm, right? Is it's almost always mana. If you can get really good ways to efficiently generate a lot of mana, you're normally in a pretty good place. And there's sort of a few different sort of macro ways of doing that, right? Probably the most common is you're combining a bunch of rituals. So there's things like Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, Seething Song. So cards that generate more mana than they cost to cast. And then you're playing some way to hopefully play them again out of the graveyard often. And just by doing that, you've generated a really large Storm count and a lot of mana. You can then cast your tutor or whatever, go and get your Storm win condition and go from there. There are other ways you can do this, though, which can be pretty effective. So one thing that's been quite a lot of cubes over the years has been mana doublers. So things that let your lands tap for more mana than they usually do. Things like Heartbeat of Spring, High Tide, I think is probably the best here. That lets all your islands tap for an additional blue. If you combine, so just casting a High Tide will often put you up a bunch of mana if you have enough islands in play. Then if you find ways to untap your islands again, things like Turnabout, things like Candelabra, then you'll have a really, really big mana engine. And that's going to be enough to let you then cast a draw 7, find whatever you need to win the game from there. Obviously things like Frantic Search are also great here, right? Probably the most powerful, like, not power card for generating your mana is going to be Lion's Eye Diamond. That's the 0 mana, discard your hand and sacrifice it to generate 3 mana of any color. So this, obviously, not a good card on its own, doesn't let you cast spells from your hand. But if you do something like cast a Yawgmoth Will, which will let you cast spells from your graveyard, and then with that on the stack, you crack your Lion's Eye Diamond, you're already into 3 mana, and you can replay the Lion's Eye Diamond again out of your graveyard, crack it again. You don't care about discarding your hand, you don't have one. Now you're into 6 mana, and that's going to be enough to let you play a bunch of cards out of your graveyard and win from there. There's even some sort of weirder mana engines, stuff like Dream Halls can work really well in the Storm deck because it lets you keep powering through those cards.
Dreamhall seems like more like an accidental storm.
Yeah.
Rather than
it's interesting.
I think I'm storming off.
It's a very cool and fun like mana engine because it makes your spells free, right? So it is a massive mana engine, but there's also like a subclass of, well, not subclass, but there's also a group of cards which have been in the Mitgo cube over time, but they can also be in any cube if you want them to be, which are just like 1,000-Year Storm, Dream Halls, Bolas's Citadel, Memory Jar, this sort of thing, where they're also not completely embarrassing to show and tell into play, sort of thing. So there's some other cards around that you can use to then create a mana engine, and like Citadel and Dream Halls, out of the ones I just said, are really good mana engines. 1,000-Year Storm is possibly a mana engine if you want to think about it that way, but it's kind of just a nutty card in itself. But yeah, I think Dream Halls is a really fun one.
Yeah, I love any excuse to play Dream Hall, so maybe we're taking it for a Storm spin next time round. What do we think about like Electromancer effects? Because in theory they are netting you mana as well. So I mean things like Goblin Electromancer, Nightscape Familiar for older fans out there. Cards that make kind of like your instant and sorceries or certain colors of spell cost cheaper. Cost like a generic less cheaper to cast. In theory, if you're casting your rituals, it helps you be up more on mana. How do we feel about those in Storm?
I think they're okay, but I think their reliability is the problem, right? One of the if your Storm deck is reliant on them to do the modern version of Storm, like the modern Gift Storm list, where you're playing a Baral and then making your red rituals into red dark rituals. The problem with the Storm decks is you typically don't have many creatures, and your advantage over your opponent because they've got 2 or 3 dead cards in their hand which have no targets and they're removal spells. So you're kind of turning those on, and it's also kind of hard where we're not in a pre-constructed format. I could get a Baral, but I end up with my mana being Dark Ritual and Rite of Flame sort of thing, and all of a sudden my Baral doesn't do anything, because you need a critical mass of rituals which can be discounted, of which there's 3, 4? There's not many.
Yeah.
Around
I guess
sort of
like
thing.
Manamorphose kind of gets into that class at that point.
Yeah, like they're good, they're fine, but I think if you want to play that effect, I would be much more interested in you playing like a Helm of Awakening, which does it just globally, universally. It's not yeah, and because that goes into other combos as well. So that's
That makes sense. I guess the electron ones, they might be more for slightly lesser powered level cubes than the vintage power level kind of thing. I guess is where they mostly play, because I'm assuming a goblin electron monster is going to be a bit cheaper than a York's will, I guess.
I would imagine so.
I do have a gold bordered one. That can't be that expensive. But hey ho.
Yeah, I'd be surprised. I don't know how much a York will is these days, but I don't know. Some of those gold border cards are pretty bad expensive.
My best ever purchase was £1 for a gold bordered Gaia's Cradle. I think it's worth like 50 quid now.
Yeah, that's correct. That is. Yeah, I was annoyed that I spent £6 on a gold bordered Thawing Glaciers, but
oh, Josh, let's go.
I couldn't find the original one. Sorry. Yeah. One other mana engine though that I don't know if we just interrupted James or he just forgot about it. Probably the latter. But Fastbond's a really good mana engine as well. Fastbond typically goes more into the sort of like draw 70 Storm decks where you just play your Fastbond, dump all your lands, wheel your cards, dump all your lands, and then eventually you'll find something. Fastbond also has a little mana doubling bit of fun with something like a sack outlet for your lands and your Yawgmoth's Will effect, or exactly just Yawgmoth's Will, I think, in this instance, where you can play Fastbond, tap all your mana, sacrifice all your lands, cast Yawgmoth's Will, play all your lands out of your yard, sort of thing. So you can get like a little double out of that as well. And then one other one, which is also very demanding on life points, but I've registered a lot of channel in Storm decks as well. Then you don't have to worry about colorless costs. You're just all about that colored mana, right? So you can, like Rite of Flame, Manamorphose channel.
Double green as well. Is that not a bit greedy, or are you getting there?
I don't know, but if you go forest, island, channel, time spiral, and then right, I've got 4 untapped lands. I've got 7 new cards, and I don't have to worry about the colored mana. I'm not saying it's the best mana engine in the world, but it's one that's floating around these powerful cubes. Is you can utilize channel in your Storm decks, but it might mean that you have to be a bit more aggressive when you're going off, because you might need 12 life to kill them with, and if they're playing Goblin Guides, then that might not be a luxury you have for too long, sort of thing.
Yeah, can go for the mini tendrils to recharge your channel is always a nice one.
Restock the channel and go again. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
right. Yeah, I can really see what you meant when you were kind of like Storm makes the most use out of all the broken cards. We've added a Dream Halls, we've added a channel. I love all of this. Cool. Next thing in terms of the puzzle, I guess. So we have our mana. We discussed some ways of making the mana for the deck. Next thing we need to do is draw cards. We need fuel in multiple ways. We need mana, and we need to be keeping the spells coming through our hand. What are some of the best ways of drawing cards and keeping the cards flowing? Like, is it cantrips? Is it wheels? Is it a combination of all these? Kind of, what are we thinking of? James, I'll throw this to you first.
Yeah, so one of the most powerful ways you can keep cards coming in Storm is casting the same cards again. The Yogg-Will's a card we've mentioned a few times already, like Underworld Breach, also fantastic here. So that's going to let you keep reusing the same spells, which can, again, keep fueling your mana and keep drawing cards. Wheels also great in Storm because they play really well with the rituals. So you just go ritual, wheel with like 4 mana floating. And then, because normally the issue with wheels, right, is if you just tap out for a wheel, they get to use their hand of 7 cards before you get to use yours. Storm can break that because you can, with the rituals, get up on mana and still have a bunch of mana floating post-wheel. it's kind of why Time Spiral is the best wheel most of the time for Storm, because it also gives you your mana back from your lands right away. And then on top of that, we can play some like regular card draw spells to fuel up. So cantrips are great because they can help set you up for your mana early, and they're really cheap cards that count towards your Storm count. But we can also, like, registering something like a Fact or Fiction in your deck is often a good thing. You can cast that sort of the turn before you go off. It dumps spells in your graveyard and gives you cards in hand, and you can often cast it again during your Storm turn.
Nice, makes sense. I guess as well, of all the wheels, you are the most likely to get the Time Spiral as well, I'm guessing, because yes, if you have a Shieldred, you'll probably still so happy taking it, but it's just not as cheap to cast as the other one, so that kind of makes sense.
One of the big search ones, sorry, so just in terms of getting access to cards, it's going to come up a lot because it's one of the best Storm cards, but Brain Freeze as well. You can, if you've already got the card that's going to allow you to cast everything a second time, like Past in Flames, Yawgmoth's Will, Underworld Breach, these sorts of things, you can just have a little exchange with your opponent where you pass the turn to them, they play a creature, you bolt their creature, they do nothing else. In their end step, you can Brain Freeze yourself for 9. If you're already holding your like massive regrowth sort of thing, your Yawgmoth's Will or your Underworld Breach, you've just effectively drawn 9 cards. So there's lots of spots in gameplay as well where you'll find that your Brain Freeze is just drawing you half your deck, and that can be quite a nice one of getting access to more cards as well.
No, nice, that makes sense. Just on those, because they are coming up quite a lot as we're talking about them. Like, how vital is cards like Yawgmoth's Will, Underworld Breach to the Storm deck? Is that kind of what it's kind of sounding like? Is that the card that kind of pushes it over to being like a powerful deck rather than like a?
They are going to be like linchpin cards in most of your decks, because a typical, like the I think the not level 1 Storm kill, but one of the classics is going to be like Ritual, Demonic Tutor, Yawgmoth's Will, Ritual, Demonic Tutor, Tendrils. Right, that's 8 Storm there. That's quite easy. If you've got a Gitaxian Probe or a Preordain lingering in your graveyard, you're at 9. They've fetched a land. They've shocked a land. They're dead, right? You do getting to 10 is, part of it for Tendrils, but yeah, there's the moment you've got the Yawgmoth's Will stuff, you get many more much simpler lines. So a lot of your lines will be getting to your Yawgmoth's Will or Underworld Breach. You can do it without them, but then that's when I think you need the next level of mana engines, where it's like Dream Halls, 1000 Year Storm, Bolas' Citadel, these sorts of cards, where their impact is so big that you do have the kind of ability to draw your whole deck without having to go back through it in your graveyard, sort of thing. But the Ritual Storm decks will typically go through their graveyard anyway. So
yeah, I'd say if you have a Storm deck that isn't using its graveyard at all, you almost always are going to need a bunch of wheels as your best ways to keep your cards flowing. But for decks that are just relying on wheels, it is a little bit tougher in that you're going Ritual, Wheel, and hoping your wheel hand is good. Which, I mean, you can build your deck in a way where most of the time it will be, but some of the time it won't be, Sometimes your wheel hand will be like 5 lands, a removal spell, and a cantrip, and you won't get there.
At some point, you've got to draw some lands if you're wheeling a lot, right? So
Exactly. Whereas if the lines where you're just tutoring and going through your graveyard, you can know when you cast your first ritual of that turn that deterministically you have the kill if your opponent doesn't disrupt you. I mean, I might not know because I might have messed up working it out, but people who are good at playing Storm will know.
Awesome. So we have our mana engines, we have ways of making mana, we have cards. What are the best win conditions? Josh, I'll pass this to you. What cards are you looking to cast to win you the game? And also kind of how highly should you take them?
So in Cube, Brain Freeze is just the best one. You don't need many Storm to win with a Brain Freeze. And it's also the cheapest one. And it can also be, as I said earlier, used in multiple different ways where you have like even like a little counter exchange with your opponent and you can go like freeze, snap, freeze, that sort of thing. So Brain Freeze is the best one because you don't need many Storm. It's the cheapest one typically. Is also blue. Tendrils is probably the next best one because we need a lower Storm count to kill with. It's just a Storm of 10 sort of thing. Well, actually, the Brain Freeze is killing on a Storm of 10. But Tendrils is in the colors of Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, Yawgmoth's Will, DT, right? So there's going to be some times when you might be a blue-black deck, but as you start storming, you only need to go through black mana to get there and back again, sort of thing. So I think those two are going to be the best ones. I haven't really seen Grape Shot around in many cubes. That sounds like it's a bit difficult in limited, in a more limited environment. But then there's going to be some backup. I think those two that I've just said are the main two that are going to be the best ones. There's going to be others. There's the new Dragon one. Empty the Warrens was around for years, but those two are a bit difficult because you've got to pass a turn usually. So Brain Freeze and Tendrils are the ones that kill them now and kill them quickly, sort of thing.
Yeah, I do love the Dragon one, but I can see how it's, yeah, if you're going through all the hassle of casting all these spells, doing this whole turn, then pass go doesn't really seem like the vibe.
Yeah,
as
you
much,
really don't want a Storm deck that loses to Wrath of God, honestly. It's a bad way to go.
In terms of pick order as well, Brain Freeze I would take quite highly. So I think Brain Freeze is actually kind of sought over these days. I think it can be used in a number of different ways. And if the environment you're playing in has got Underworld Breach as well, Brain Freeze is a really simple pickup because Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze can win games on their own with just a Petal or an LED and a Lotus make it easier, but you can just win by casting an Underworld Breach and a few Brain Freezes, sort of thing. It's not too hard if you've got a deck that drags out, sort of thing, or an Academy. So yeah, I think Brain Freeze I would take it like a slightly premium level, but Tendrils is one of those ones where it is very good. It is going to be a good kill condition. Depending on how thought over I feel like Storm is in a given pod, I'm usually quite happy to let that one go around, because there's also other ways you can win a game, right? If you create 30 mana and draw your whole deck, the world is your oyster. You can.
A Fireball still exists in a lot of cubes, I guess. That's still...
Yeah, I think it's called Fourth Airlingus now, but
I see. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it draws you cards as well. Wonderful.
Yeah. Perfect.
Nice.
Perfect. Can't defend the monarchy, but that's fine. You'll get a card out of it.
Just some other Storm cards I did want to touch on. What do you? I do see Mind's Desire being played in cube still. What do we think about Mind's Desire? James, I'll throw that one to you.
Yeah, so it's certainly a very powerful Storm card. It's not really a win con, right? I'd describe it more as analogous to your wheel or something. It's like the Mind's Desire can kind of do a bit of the time spiral job, right? If you've got your Storm count up high enough, you can pretty reliably think you're going to win the game once you've cast your Mind's Desire, but it is not winning the game itself. You have to put something else in your deck that actually wins the game. And that doesn't have to be a card that says Storm on it. I think Storm is kind of the word that is used to describe the archetype of making loads of mana, casting loads of spells, and winning the game. But there are definitely ways you can win the game that don't have the word Storm written on them. So, for example, there's things like Fast as Oracle. You can just get through your whole deck and win with a Fast as Oracle. That's pretty doable if you have like a very powerful way to repeatedly draw cards. Like my deck recently doing it with like a Displacer Kitten and a Coveted Jewel, right? Because every time you cast a spell, you're drawing 3 cards and making 3 mana. You can get through your whole deck with that, and you don't need a Storm card to win. You can just win with a Fast as Oracle. But even if you miss on that stuff too, like you can win with kind of just another combo, because if you have another combo in your deck that wins you the game, and you see all the cards in your deck and you have a bunch of tutors and make a bunch of mana, it's fine for your win con sometimes to be, I'm going to through the breach and Emrakul, right? Like that works too. I've certainly seen Josh win with decks where it's like the whole win condition was a lightning bolt. That I never really understand how he manages to make that work.
How many times were you casting that lightning bolt?
I know I had a really cool one, which was the Doomsday stack with. It was when Regrowth was in the cube, and I remember having a Doomsday stack with Regrowth, Time Twister, Doomsday, and Collective Brutality, and that was co-brew on a loop. You just got to drain them a bunch. That was quite fun. Yeah, no, you don't have to have the Storm Card. And James picked up on but mentioned one of the really fun, more recent additions to the Vintage Cube. Obviously, it's been around for a while. Is Displacer Kitten. Displacer Kitten with Coveted Jewel is a really nice way to draw your whole deck. But then there's also Displacer Kitten with Tameo as well. If you've got one of these LED Lotus or Lotus Petal, Kitten, Tameo, and the Sacrifice Artifact is infinite mana, infinite storm. And at that point, you just need your Bolt, your Collective Brutality. Anything that targets your opponent will probably kill them at that point. So that's another little Easter egg in there to go and find.
Which Tameo is that, out of interest? Is that the Simic
Absolutely
one?
no idea. Yeah, Simic one. What's it called?
Is it Collector of Tales?
War of the Spark, the one that regrowth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Tameo was a really fun one. Displacer Kitten was a really cool card for Storm there as well, because it does do things like reset your Planeswalkers, reset your Coveted Jewels. I remember resetting an Atali with it, and that's really funny because then it casts every spell in your deck. And then your whole deck's on the stack. So Displacer Kittens fits really well into the Storm decks because your whole deck is non-creature spells, but it is a bit of a lightning rod. So yeah, I think it is. Yeah,
you generally can't be on cast my Displacer Kitten, pass the turn, try and go off. You need to do it on your Storm turn.
Exactly. That's a bit like back in the day when it was like, this is my heartbeat of spring, I'm going to kill you next turn. And it's like, you're not getting another turn. Right. So, yeah, you can't really be tapping 4 lands, playing Displacer Kitten and crossing your fingers. So,
yeah, for sure. Displacer Kitten is one of those cards as well, which I think is kind of worth speccing on because it goes accidentally infinite so easily. Like, especially if you have just any zeros in your deck, like the 3 mana to Fairy, a 0-drop, and Tamia and Kitten will draw you your deck. If your 0-drop casts for mana, it will get you infinite mana as well, because each time you cast it, you're flickering your Planeswalker. You can even like a Petal, a Displacer Kitten, and Lurrus is infinite mana, which is quite cool because you flicker your Lurrus. It's now a new Lurrus. You can play a new thing from your graveyard, which can be the Lotus Petal again, and you keep going. And the nice thing with all those loops as well is if you do have a Storm card in your deck, you're generating infinite Storm as well.
So one card we mentioned in there that I want to throw to you specifically, Josh, because I know you have a bit of a penchant of killing me with it in games of Magic. Talk to me about Doomsday. How does Doomsday... Because Doomsday can exist as its own unique deck, but kind of how does it cross over into Storm? And kind of like, at what point are you taking Doomsday while you're building a Storm deck as kind of like a... Not a pivot, but I guess kind of like as a backup win condition, as it were.
There's another one of these cards. It's like so it is a kill in itself, right? Where you can Doomsday and make a Thassa's Oracle pile, but it does a very similar job to the Yawgmoth Wills and Underworld Breaches that we talked about earlier, where it gives you access to a bunch of powerful cards, and in this way, it's stacking your deck to make a kill. That could be a Storm kill if you wanted it to be. It could be a Oracle or Jace kill. Labman style kill if you want it to be as well. But the thing where they cross over so nicely is that you can cast both Doomsday and Yawgmoth's Will off of a Dark Ritual or a Dark Petition even, which is the 5 mana tutor that adds 3 black. And the decks cross over enough where you want the same cards. You want your cantrips, you want some permission, you probably want a Thoughtseize or Inquisition. You want, nice cheap cantripping cards which help you filter and set up your hand your big splashy play. So the setup of the deck is going to be very similar. It just might be a slightly different kill condition, slightly different payoff. And, it also means that you get to think about Doomsday stacks, which I think is the best thing that Magic's given us.
That is the most used sentence I think I've...
Yeah, to be clear, Josh does not need to be drafting or have drafted remotely recently to message people about Doomsday stacks.
Doomsday is, I think, one of the most fun cards just to think about. And yeah, it's just really fun. And I remember being on a call with James once, watching James try and play Doomsday, and yeah, it was. I think the most fun part of that was telling him to put the top card of his Doomsday stack as a draw 7. A lot of the time was quite fun as well. But no, Doomsday is very powerful. It lets you stack 5 cards in your deck to build a pile that kills, and there's a few cards around in Magic that can help facilitate that. So Gataxian Probe's a very good one because that's 0 mana, gets you into the 5 cards you've just put there from your deck and graveyard. You've also got Gush. If you can pick up 2 lands, that gives you 2 cards, which is even better because then you can get another card draw to empty your deck and something else. So if your environment allows it, then something like Gush into LED, Deep Analysis, you're going to have your deck in your hands, a blue floating, and then it's just land drop Thoracle as a kill from there, sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know. It's powerful. The decks cross over enough in that you want the same things. It's just a different end game plan.
Cool. So yeah, so we've touched on a bunch of the key cards for specifically the Storm deck. While they're kind of fresher in our memory, let's actually talk about the draft a little bit. Let's jump straight to that. Because yeah, there's so many different moving pieces in this deck, and it's kind of like a lot of the card draw cards and a lot of the ramp cards aren't as specific for the Storm deck as like the payoffs are. Kind of like how do we know Storm is open, and what early picks do you want to see that will lead you in that direction?
I think ideally your early picks are probably just going to be a pretty boring blue-black start, typically, right? You're going to want to take Ponders and Preordains because those cards are phenomenal in whatever deck you draft. You're going to want to take Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Fatal Push because they're going to be brilliant in whatever deck you draft. And then at some point along the way, you sometimes might have to be a bit aggressive about it, but you can pick up a Ritual, and then you might see some slightly tier 2 Stormy cards come back around. Like Cabal Ritual isn't a high pick for even the reanimated decks, right? They might play a Dark Ritual, but Cabal Ritual's a bit worse, right? So you might start seeing. I'm trying to think of another example at the moment, but I don't know if you've got one, James, but yeah, Cabal Ritual might come around. Yawgmoth's Will is not a high pick unless you're drafting Storm, so you can usually pick one, pack one, Ponder, and if you see that 8th pick or 9th pick Yawgmoth's Will, then we're gaming, sort of thing. So I think with Storm there's a lot of floating cards around the pod, and you do need to maximize taking the cards that are actually good first of all, and then because the Storm kill isn't many cards, right? It's a couple of Rituals, it's a Tutor, which we're going to play anyway probably, and then a Yawgmoth's Will and a Tendrils. It doesn't have to take up loads of space.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it's, similarly start off taking good cards, paying attention to what's in the pack that might wheel, because I have zero interest in fighting other people for a Storm deck. It generally ends up with 2 train wrecks in the draft pod, and maximum you'll get 1 win when you play the other train wreck Storm deck. But if I have a nice blue and black start, maybe I have a Tutor. Tutor really pulls me into Storm because they're great in a lot of decks, but Storm maximizes Tutors I think better than any other deck. And I know there was a Yarg Will in the pack I opened. Then it's like, well, maybe I want this. I'll take this Cabal Ritual over, or I'll take this Dark Ritual over. Not much, because if that Yarg Will wheels, I'm really going to want it. And then when I see the Yarg Will, I'm like, right, okay, we're gaming with and then the next pack, I'm perfectly happy first picking a Lion's Eye Diamond because I know that's where I'm going.
Right, okay, yeah.
I'm more than happy first picking a Lion's Eye Diamond in pack 1, to be honest with you. But
yeah, I think that might be the difference in our approach.
You'll have a Temple Garden in there somewhere before you have an LED.
Yeah, but the thing is, you need a much less good Storm deck to win than I do.
Sure.
I think I can draft Storm, not perfectly, but kind of okay. But playing Storm, I feel like I'm leaving a lot of money on the table a lot of the time, because I just struggle to actually calculate that whole line and play around stuff in a sensible way. And so I kind of feel like I need it to be wide open before before I'm interested,
No, that makes sense. Yeah. There's a lot of things there that we will touch on in the remainder of this episode, kind of like playing the deck and also kind of bits to include in your cube, because I do know that you do need a fairly large amount of specific cards to support Storm, but kind of keeping it where we are in terms of the deck and when we're drafting it. Ideally, kind of what is the breakdown in terms of like if you had your like peak Storm deck and like how roughly kind of like how many mana producers, how many card draw spells, and how many of like the win cons are we looking to have roughly in a deck? Kind of like it could be kind of ballpark, because I have got the feeling that kind of some of Storm is a bit vibes.
Yeah, I don't like win cons. This is 0.5. I don't think I've ever like considered that before. The main thing you want to prioritize though when you're drafting is going to be like when you decide I am drafting Storm, you're going to really want to have to consider how you're producing the mana you need to win. That's always
right. Okay,
that's always going to be your shortfall. So the mana has to kind of take priority over anything else, because you're going to need an amount of mana. You don't need loads, right? Sometimes it's just get to 5 so I can tutor and then York's Will, or tutor and then breach and then get back into mana, right? You don't need loads. You just need some that pushes you over the edge sort of thing, more than just I play 6 lands sort of thing. I think the cantrips and the card draw are going to be the main thing that you're going to have like the bulk of, and then after that is going to be a number of good payoffs. I guess 3 or 4 payoffs. You can probably push it from there, but then a payoff can also just be a tutor, right? It could just be a vampiric or a mystical.
Yeah, it can be your second payoff easily. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. But one of the other things is that if you're in a slightly more like Wheel of Fortune style deck, then your Wheel of Fortunes are also payoffs, but they're also your card advantage and your card draw. So stacking your deck full of those isn't going to be an issue. But I think access to cards, whether it's just looking at them and taking one with cantrips, or just Fact or Fictions, Wheel of Fortunes, everything in between sort of thing, I think that's always going to be the like critical thing that's in the bulk of your deck. Then there's going to be a number of payoffs, 3, 4, 5 of them, and that's including tutors. And then the rest will probably just be trying to produce some mana, I guess. So I'm just looking through Storm lists at the moment. And I'm just looking at Storm lists. I've got Storm lists where I've got a Dark Ritual and a Lotus Petal sort of thing. Like, there's not a lot of mana in here.
Yeah, but you're finding them, right?
Yeah, we're finding them with tutors or Fact or Fiction style things, like big card draw. And then we're just casting them a couple of times. One of the big reprints, one of the big prints in recent Magic was the Beseech the Mirror, right? So I've got a deck here in front of me that's got Dark Ritual and LED and a Chrome Mox. That's all my fast mana. But I can Beseech for Yawgmoth's Will, cast my Dark Ritual and my LED again, cast a Beseech and get my Tendrils, right? That's not many fast mana spells. Everything else in that deck is just blue.
Yeah, I think this is actually what makes Storm a decent amount harder to draft than a lot of other combo decks in Cube, because if you're drafting Reanimator, say, you can pretty reasonably give a guideline of like you want X amount of animation spells, X amount of targets, X amount of discard outlets. Tutors, right? Like you can give reasonable ballpark figures. Whereas with Storm, the answer is kind of always it depends, right? Because it almost what I'd be thinking about more than how many rituals I have or whatever is like, what does with what I have, how do I want my Storm turn to go?
Right, okay.
Like, if I can tutor a bit and find what I need, what is going to let me go off? So, like, if my engine is Brain Freeze, Underworld Breach, and a Petal or a Diamond, then I don't need that much mana to do that, right? It's pretty compact. Whereas if my Storm turn needs to involve getting up to a Time Spiral or a Mind's Desire or something, then I need a bunch more rituals because I'm going to need to generate a lot more mana in that Storm turn. I think, yeah, it's almost more useful to think about when you're drafting, like, what do I want my Storm turn to look like? And what do I need to make that happen?
Okay, nice. Yeah, that does make sense. Let's just round off this deck now, because we've gone through a lot of cards we need to storm off and do the big turn, but I'm assuming we need some protection for our spells. Like how highly are we prioritizing things like counter magic? Are we running creature removal? Do we care what our opponents are doing as much, or is it just more just protecting our stuff? Kind of like, what does like the rest of the deck look like, basically?
That's going to be like that bit that they're saying, like when we're drafting the deck, right? When you're starting a draft, you're just going to be, you might be sitting down to force some storm, and that's fine. You can pick one, pack on your LEDs and your Yawgmoth Swirls if you really want to. That's fine. But if we're, drafting sensibly, I guess, and eating our vegetables on the way through, we're going to be taking Underground Seas, Volcanic Islands. We're going to be taking efficient removal in Bolt, Push, Spell Pierce, this sort of thing. So, and you're going to want to approach the beginning of each pack like that anyway, where you just take the best interactive card that you can see, or cantripping card, most powerful card sort of thing. There might be some you don't want to float, like a pack 3 freeze or a pack 3 Yawgmoth Will. You might not want to float it. But hopefully the deck rounds out from where we opened up a mediocre pack in pack 1, or got past a relatively mediocre pack 1, and we take something like an Inquisition or a Duress out of it. And that can be a little bit of interaction. Picking up Push, Dismember, any of the terror variants that are in cubes these days isn't particularly hard at some point if you're in a black deck. Same with red. Most cubes will have 6 or 7 1 to 2 mana red burn spells, and you do want something in there because you want a way to kill fast aggressive creatures, and you also want to, if possible, think about basically the white player usually, and what do you do about their Thalia, because that's going to be in a lot of cubes that you play. Having an answer to that sort of thing is, that's very specific, but that is one of the cards in cube that is going to kill you if you can't remove it from the battlefield. It doesn't need to do much else, because there's a Thalia in play, your deck probably doesn't function. So that was a very specific example, but it's one of those things as well. If you're playing an 8-man pod and your kill is Brain Freeze, at some point in the draft, you might need to think about what you do about the person who drafts Emrakul. Even if they get it 15th pick, because no one's doing that, you might need a game plan for that sort of thing as well. Because, if you're decking them, they can just bring in an Emrakul and they can't die.
Yeah, for sure. I think the removal the interaction I probably prioritize the highest in Storm, I think, is the discard, because it lets me beat their interaction a lot of the time, which is in some ways a lot of the time more important than beating their threats, right? Because you're trying to be quicker. And you can do it like proactively before you go off. Whereas like a counter spell, it can be hard to go off keeping blue up all the time, right? Whereas a discard spell, I can just fire off. I don't even necessarily need to fire off the same turn. Sometimes you fire off the turn before because you're going to be mana constrained. And sure, if they top deck to counter that one turn, you die, but you generally feel pretty safe. I'm prioritizing that pretty highly. Stuff like the removal spells, I kind of find you end up with some in your deck, and they're fine, but it's kind of like because you're not going to have 23 spells which all directly contribute to you going off most of the time, right? And removal spells are just what you fill it up with, and generally I'm not prioritizing them super highly. I'm kind of taking them out of the packs that don't have anything good for me. But I find I'm not like going after them super hard once I know I'm in Storm, just because there's so many other things I need, right? Like, I kind of need the fixing more most of the time, so I'll often take a land over a removal spell. Something like a Dark Ritual, I might not be completely confident I can wheel, even if I'm confident that no one else is in Storm, because other players put that card in their deck. I need the cantrips over this.
I was even cast a turn 1 Hex Mage.
Yeah, exactly. People do these things. So yeah, I kind of just find often I play some of the removal spells that I end up with, and that's what is filling up my deck once I've put in all the cards that I really want to play to help myself go off.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned fixing there. in this episode already, we've mentioned some double blue pip spells in this deck. We've mentioned some red spells. We've mentioned some triple black spells in this deck. So every deck, like it's 2024, draft your lands. Everyone kind of like every deck needs fixing, well, apart from the monocard ones. But like, does Storm need to prioritize it more if it is trying to run this kind of pip heavy 3-color deck, or is it more because you have these ways of making like big mana return, things like your rituals, things like coveted jewel, that kind of stuff, like are the mana requirements of the deck as bad as I'm imagining them, or can you kind of get there with like drafting like 2 fetch lands, 3 jewels, and like an average kind of land package, or do you need more?
You've got to take your lands, right? I think that's just like a drafting fundamental. You've got to take your lands for your multicolored decks. That said, when it comes to like actual deck building, you might find that you've got, a predominantly blue deck, and you're accessing black for the ritual and tutor chain, and that's kind of it. So you might actually be able to, you might end up having something like a Doomsday on your deck, but you're not actually playing too many swamps because you've got 2 fetch lands, 2 dual lands, a few swamps sort of thing. Because your mana engine is likely going to fix you for your big turn. I don't think you need to go too ham, but you do need to take your lands because if you've got a Storm deck with a watery grave, it's going to be a lot better than a Storm deck with an island and a swamp in it, sort of thing. Like, yeah. I don't know. James is the one that takes lands.
Yeah, it's weird. Sometimes it sort of feels like you need more swamps to support the Fatal Push in your deck than the Doomsday in your deck, right? Because you're casting the Doomsday off a Dark Ritual on turn 4, and you really want to be able to cast the Fatal Push on turn 1.
Yeah. There's also like lands though that you, the cube creator, can put in, right? There was a time when Sunken Ruin was in the Modo cube, and that was really sick for Doomsday, because then one of your islands is going to produce black alongside the Sunken Ruin in a swamp, right? So you can also make it a bit easier on the combo player.
Yeah, I have that in mind. I might as well just write the word Josh on the Sunken Ruins.
Yeah, is Necro in your cube? Can we get Necro in there? Necro is not in many cubes, and that card's a lot of fun.
Necro is not in mine at the moment, but you're probably not far off wins in terms of adding it.
Oh no, I think I'm adding Solitary Confinement, aren't I?
Yeah, no, but I think it is Storm decks. Often when you're building your mana base, you don't just, if you're used to like counting the number of pips you have for each color and building your mana base based off that, you probably need to look a little bit deeper with your Storm deck in terms of, when do I want to cast these spells? And are my rituals helping me? Or is it just I'm casting it late enough that I'll have cantripped a bunch and found my sources?
There's also things like, what is my mana engine, right? If it's dark rituals, we can ignore some black pips maybe. But then also something like High Tide that we mentioned earlier doubles your islands. So you're probably going to want to be a bit aggressive on the number of mountains, swamps, and forests you're playing, so that we can cram in another island or 2 so that our High Tide's maximized. Because once we've gone High Tide, Frantic Time Spiral, we should hopefully be able to do something with that. But we just need to be able to do that and it be good, sort of thing, and have enough floating mana afterwards. So I think it depends on how we're creating our mana through our Storm kill versus, how many pips I need. Like if I'm playing a fast bond Storm deck, do I want to actually load up on more forests so that my fast bond is castable earlier, even though, I actually only have 1 to 2 green cards in my deck? I might want to play, I don't know, a great number of forests, 5 or 6 forests, just so that my turn 1 fast bond is cracked.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it does sometimes feel in Storm like you can get away with quite a lot more than in other decks, just because half of what our deck is doing is seeing cards, right? We are really good at digging for mana. As long as you have, the base color that you need, like often blue, but sometimes black, to like cast those cantrips and get into more cards.
Makes sense. So I think that covers kind of drafting the deck. Next thing to kind of touch on is playing the deck. Is personally, I find this is probably the part that's like the most daunting for people who haven't played the deck before, who haven't I haven't got that much experience for it. Kind of like, let's start at the beginning. Kind of, what are we looking for in like an ideal opening hand that is attainable in a average Storm deck? Would you say, like how many card draw spells, how many bits of ramp are we looking for?
Well, you're going to want a bit of everything probably, but the most important thing is going to be card draw spells, like things that help you sculpt your hand and develop a route to victory. I know that's very generic and very this is how Magic works sort of thing, but if you've it's a bit like just putting more pieces together from a Reanimator deck, right? Like in Reanimator, we want a way to get something into the bin, we want a way to get something out. Yeah, that's about it, really, isn't it? In Reanimator, but in Storm, you want to work out how we're getting into our mana, and then how we're getting access to the will or the tutor or what have you. So the card draw is going to be pretty important here. And then you're also probably going to want a little bit of interaction. You probably want to play against your opponent in some way. But something like, I don't know, let's say a cantrip, a dark ritual, an Inquisition, and a bolt is going to be a perfectly acceptable keepable hand. It's not the fastest, but it's going to get there. The more fast mana we have in our opener, the more we can just look for the payoff card, be it Doomsday, Underworld Breach, Tinker as well. Tinker's a card I don't think we've mentioned yet, but Tinker can go and get a jar and a bonus Citadel sort of thing. That's easy routes to victory. So yeah, I think the main thing you're going to want to have is access to more cards. If your game plan is to Thoughtseize them and bolt their first 2 threats and play some lands, that's not going to be a winning recipe. Your card draw spell doesn't have to be a Preordain or a Ponder or something really good like that. It could just be, I'm going to duress you, I'm going to bolt your first threat, and then on turn 4 I'm going to fact or fiction you, and on turn 5 I'm hopefully going to win off of that fact. And that fact might just find us a ritual in a wheel or something like that. But that's still good enough, right? That's still going to push us into 7 more cards. So, yeah, James, I don't know if you've got more.
Yeah, I think the card I'm always thrilled to see in my opener is a tutor, because if I have a tutor, then even if I don't have any of the other really important pieces I need to go off, but somewhere in my deck is a Yawgmoth's Will and somewhere in my deck is a Lion's Eye Diamond, I know that if my other cantrips find either half of that, then I can just tutor for the other half. And once you've cast some card draw spells, you possibly have enough in your graveyard to win just off of that. Maybe find a ritual or whatever too. But it just means that all of your other draws get so much better because you can find the combinations of cards you need. Yeah. Whereas the hands you don't like are the ones where you just feel like you need to naturally draw a bunch of different pieces. Because, even if you can pay some sands and stay alive, it's just going to take you a long time to put anything together. And ultimately, you're not that set up to win a game where your game plan is to 1-for-1 too much with your opponent, because eventually they're going to draw better threats than you are, right? Because you have like Tendrils of Agony in your deck, and it that doesn't answer their questing beasts, so they will kill you with it unless you can piece something together in a reasonable amount of time.
No, it makes sense. Yeah. It does kind of sound like as well that we've already kind of covered with that kind of what you're trying to do in the early and mid game. You're looking to sculpt your hand. You're trying to work towards the point where you have your way of playing a bunch of spells and making a bunch of mana. Kind of like,
I was going to say, one of the things with Storm as well is you are just a deck that fundamentally just wants to make a lot of land drops. Like every land you have in play is going to make your kill turn so much easier as well. So yeah, I don't know. That's just making land drops is going to be really good. So if we're doing a bit of filtering and a bit of interacting with whatever our opponent's doing, and if that's allowing us to make a land drop, that's going to make your life a lot easier. And a lot of the time, you're going to be building up to a point that you're going off as late as possible. But
yeah, but the other nice thing about Storm, right, is because you have your game plan is kind of broken in a lot of ways, you can just oops into the nuts. Like you do have outs for hands that are just absurd and people aren't realistically beating, right? Like sometimes you just go turn 1 fast bond land wheel, and like it doesn't matter what your opponent has. So it's just an upset like that. Obviously, you're not like mulliganing 2 those, but it is a real upside of playing the deck that you have broken draws that other decks just can't deal with in a reasonable way.
No, that does make sense. Okay, this might be kind of like the bigger question of the day, because kind of we've talked about storming off. How do you know when to storm off? Like, when do you know now is the time to go for it? Like, and part of that as well is like, are there times where kind of you start storming off and then you kind of like don't, like, you after a couple of spells you kind of stop yourself? Kind of like how do you know? Yeah, how do you know when to go for it, and how do you know that this is like I have committed to this? This is what I'm doing. This is the turn I am going to win. Yeah, how do you know when to go for it?
The main factor is always going to be your opponent, right? Because whilst Storm can feel like quite a goldfishy deck, you have another player in the game, and sometimes you might be forced to try and go off, and you might get there, sort of thing. So the main thing is always just working out, is my opponent realistically killing me next turn? And, looking at what they're playing and thinking of, is there a way that you can create just out of the cards that exist that they could kill you next turn, sort of thing. If the answer is yes, and if you think it's good odds that you're going to die, like sometimes you might just be like, yes, they're possibly going to kill me next turn, but I really don't think I can get anywhere. So yeah, roll the dice, let them have a turn. But if you think, they've just worldly tutored a hasty threat to the top of their deck, and you're dead to that sort of thing, then you have to go for it. And a lot of playing Storm is building up to that point, right? And it's just playing the game, trying to get all those lands into play, and going off at the last possible moment is like the classic Storm kill. Yeah, wait as long as possible, delay, kill you at my own pace, sort of thing. But yeah, knowing what your opponent's doing and how they might kill you next turn is going to be a critical key to go off. Other than that, if you're in like a blue matchup, so blue on blue matchup, has your opponent tapped down low for like their haymaker-y type thing. So if your blue-white control opponent is just tapped out for a Jace or something, and they got no lands left, yeah, we still need to consider that they might have a force in their hand or a daze or something like that. But if we're able to get our blue opponent to tap out from other things that we're doing as well, that can be a great way to find the time to go off. And that's where your big card draw spells like Fact or Fiction, Dig Through Time, Gifts Ungiven, this sort of effect, if it's in your environment, is going to be really good as well, because these are big haymakery spells which a control deck is probably going to want to counter as well. There's a nightmare scenario for the opponent is we resolve our Fact or Fiction, we untapped, we Thoughtseize them, and now their counterspell's dead, right? So I don't feel like I'm directly answering the question of when do you need to go for it, but I think it's like we said earlier, right? A lot of the time it's just, it depends. If you think you're dying, you need to just try and go, and that's just going to be cantrip as much as possible, produce as much mana as possible, see as many cards as possible, and see if we make it. Against the blue decks, we want to slowly build up resources, and then at some point, I think a lot of the time you just want to have a fake exchange with them. So maybe pick a fight over their thing on their turn, maybe put a big card draw spell on the stack on their turn, and try and create a fight that we actually kind of don't care about, because we're already holding something like Ritual Tutor Inquisition, right? That's probably going to be fine as well. Yeah, so, and then the rest of the time, yeah, if you feel like you're going to win, feel like you can win, just push, I guess.
Yeah, I think the thing about against other blue decks as well is because they can interact with you a lot more meaningfully than the other decks, right? They have permission, whereas if you're talking about a red or a white deck, their interaction is going to be removal, which you just don't care about. So against those decks, you really can afford to just wait until you're actually dying next turn. Whereas against the blue decks, you might want to go for it, not because they're immediately killing you, but just because they're seeing a lot of cards. And the longer you wait, the more time they have to dig into that permission. And a well-timed permission spell can disrupt your whole turn. A counter spell that is landed against Storm is generally not a 1-for-1. This is generally like a 3-for-1 in the control deck's favor, right? So like you go ritual, Yargwill, and they counter your ritual. You're in a lot of trouble there.
The worst one is when they get the Yargwill with the LED on the stack. Sorry.
Yeah. Crack your LED and then they counter and response is pretty savage. So you need to sometimes in those spots you need to push, because even if you're not 100% sure you are going to win that turn, you just know that if you let them cast their card draw spell end of turn or untap with their planeswalker, then they're just going to be seeing too many cards. You're going to be way more likely they have a counter spell up for next turn, so we need to go for it this turn.
Yeah, that does make sense. I guess it's kind of you're waiting until either the last point or until you either know it's safe or you have to go for it. Or I guess as well, kind of like what we kind of discussed, like it's not like A plus B equals win, but kind of like you will have there will be like a range of hands of cards that we know will win you the game. Kind of like either if you just have your big mana producer, your Yorg's Will, or your card advantage and your win con in your hand, then you probably then it is like Kiki G's lynch win. If you resolve those cards, then you win on the spot. But I guess part of it is when you're going for it and it's not deterministic, like you don't have the bits in your hand, kind of like what things are important to keep in mind. Like, say you are going for it on that turn, or like the turn before your aggro opponent's going to kill you. You're on 6, for example, and your opponent has 6 power on the board. Next turn, they win. Kind of like you're going for it now. You have some of the bits in your hand. Kind of like, what are the key things to keep in mind so you don't kind of muck up your lines, that kind of stuff. Kind of like, is there any advice you would give to the people listening? And
it's always just how much mana do you have is always the critical point usually. Always usually. But yeah, so how much mana have you got? But also there's things when you're not sure if you can get there, or when you're not sure if you need to get there as well. You can make plays where we sort of try and do something like, don't use all of your mana first of all, right? Don't go ritual, cast Night's Whisper, right, with 5 floating. You can just ritual out a Night's Whisper. You've got a black floating. You can get back into your other rituals, sort of thing. So you can be like slightly savvy in the way we sequence our cards. But in a normal Storm turn, I guess, like in the Dream Storm turn, there's going to be like, make all my mana, cast my tutor, go and get my thing, make all my mana, cast my tutor, go and get whatever's next. But yeah, but typically you want to see as many cards as you can before you need to commit your rituals, and you want to use a lot of all your rituals and tutors and see all your gift cards before you play your big buyback regrowth Yawgmoth's Will style spell.
That makes sense. Is the Yawgmoth's Will, or the other one I keep forgetting the bloody name of?
Underworld Breach. Yeah.
Is it when you cast your Yawgmoth's Will or your Underworld Breach? Is that kind of the point of no return, basically?
Yes and no. So, like with Yawgmoth's Will, I'd say usually yes, right? Because from now on, any resources we use are going to exile. And Yawgmoth's Will is very typically going to be the last card out of your hand. The times where that's not true is when you've got like a Time Twister in your hand or something, and you're going to go for the Yawgmoth's Will because it's deterministic. But then if they Force of Will you can rebuild off of a twist sort of thing. That can be a thing that comes up. But one thing with Underworld Breach is where that is casting, that doesn't exile the spell that you cast. You can have turns in a more of a mid-game where, and I've done this before, where my turn is actually just cast Underworld Breach, and then I've got the resources in my graveyard to cast 3 Preordains, and then cross my fingers that Brain Freeze is in my top 9 sort of thing. So the Breach is slightly different because you can lead on Breach to get access to more cards. Whereas Yawgmoth's Will, you can lead on that, but you want to expend all your mana beforehand. Breach, we don't need to. We can just play the Breach, go and find what we need, and then produce the mana later if that's the way forward.
No, it does. That's thinking kind of like so you're looking to use your resources to kind of to draw you cards first before you commit your big mana or your big or your payouts. That makes sense.
Exactly, and like there's also like a lot of other payoffs that we haven't touched on too much, like Show and Tell, Tinker, these sorts of things, where and like the wheels as well the draw 7s are a big payoff as well, where with these ones you can kind of use them a bit more as bait spells to then get your Tutor Chain Offer, you can choose the Tutor as a bait spell, but we're already holding the Tinker sort of thing. Get into your big splashy effect that you're going to push multiple spells with, sort of thing.
Okay, cool. So obviously we've talked about our deck. Let's talk about our opponent's decks. In terms of matchups, what James, I'll throw this one to you. What are we pleased to be playing against? What is the perfect opponent for the Storm deck? Who are we beating up today?
Oh, anyone who is trying to jam like grindy mid-range stuff with a bunch of removal spells, you're thrilled about. Because I think actually one of the biggest upsides of playing Storm is there's just so many cards that get played in a lot of cube decks that you just really do not care about whatsoever. The obvious one being removal spells, right? You don't have any targets. But even stuff like just the value creatures, you often really don't care about. Like, say your Gruul opponent plays a Tireless Tracker. They kind of just played a 3-mana 3/2, because if they're spending mana cracking clues, you're thrilled about that. You're basically, because they don't have relevant interaction for you, the only thing you care about is how quickly are they killing you. So in that scenario, yeah, fine. Tireless Tracker, don't care. I care much more if it's like a gut that's killing me really quickly. But yeah, so I think the mid-range decks, like green decks in general, tend to be really pretty good matchups, I find, with Storm. Yeah, but black-based mid-range decks, if they aren't too heavy on discard, can also be really good matchups, and just slower combo decks, right? Like, if my Reanimator opponent, like, really quick Reanimator you might be worried about, but if my Reanimator opponent's big payoff is putting into play, 7/7 or whatever, like an Atali, say, could probably beat that. Like, I don't even necessarily need to kill them the next turn a lot of the time, because I'm not trying to one for them, right? I'm not playing that value game, so I don't really care if you get value. What we don't want to play against is people where all their interaction is really relevant, people with a ton of discard, people with a ton of permission, because they can pick your hand apart really effectively. Or just people who are trying to go even quicker than you. But with a really quick Storm deck, you can generally, if your Storm deck's really good, you can just be quicker than all the aggro decks. But with more of a medium Storm deck, you might be worried about really fast aggro.
Yeah, I could see them getting under you being a bit of an issue. On that topic, Josh, who don't you want to be playing against?
There's like the white-black creature, aggressive creature decks are horrific because they play something. Let's take a current card in Ocelot Pride, right? They'll play like a cheap threat, and then everything they do after that is going to be like hide Hollow Scholar into Deep Cavern Bat, into Vindicate Your Land, into play a Hero Blade Hold, and then you die. And I find that is like the nutlow matchup. The white decks aren't as bad as they used to be because a lot of the taxing effects have gone from the Modo cube now, and they might still exist. But there was a time when they had Vryn Windmare in there as well. On top of Thalia. Thalia's annoying. But yeah, I think it's
a bit more proactive now, white, I guess.
Exactly. And I think the cheaper, faster decks from red and white are annoying. Some of the cheap black interaction is more problematic than the blue permission because your cards are just gone, right? Blue permission, we can play around. We can also Thoughtseize that out of their hands. But when I think it's the quick white decks and the quick black interaction is the biggest problems. You will have some builds where you just literally can't beat a Force of Will, though. The Fast Bond Draw 7 decks are classic for this, where these are all my resources. I play my Wheel of Fortune, and then they force it, and you just don't do anything for 3 more turns, sort of thing. But yeah, I think the nutlow is the white-black interactive decks.
Yeah, I could see how specifically they just have everything they need to mess up your day. Yeah, that sounds like it's so.
Yeah, it's when the discard combined with a clock is a real nightmare.
Yeah, and the Clock of Tide Hollow Scholar is shockingly relevant when they strip you and vindicate 2 lands, sort of thing, and it's like
yeah. No, I think Mana Denial as well is another very potent tool against Storm. you're playing. I mean, first you're playing a lot of colors. They can, if they're wastelanding you or strip mining you or whatever, or vindicating your lands, they can keep you off colors, and you just need a lot of mana to go off.
No, definitely. That does make sense. Okay, so we've touched on the decks, we've touched on playing it. Let's actually talk about let's talk about adding Storm to a cube. From your point of view, gents, what do you think are the key cards to include? Or kind of like let's start because like I've seen like the minimum you need to support a Storm package. Because like as we've gone over, stuff like the cantrips, stuff like the card selection is things you see in lots of cubes. You don't really need to run too much more outside of what's already there to kind of support that, I would say. But like I've seen like Storm packages just be like Lion's Eye Diamond, Underworld Breach, and Brain Freeze. Like that 3-card little combo is a Storm package that you can support, but obviously it can be a lot bigger. Kind of like we've gone over the different types, but kind of like if you wanted to see this be like a larger archetype and supporting your cube, kind of like how many cards or like what portion of your kind of like is it or Dimir section do you think needs to be there to prioritize? Because like when I was putting my cube together, like a lot of the things I was saying was going to like Storm is a fairly dedicated section that like other package like other decks don't want some of these cards anywhere near as much. Kind of like if you were adding it to a cube, what would you say are the main things you would want to see to support Storm?
I think it's quite a heavy package to add in, but I think it's one where your players will benefit more the more you dedicate to it, sort of thing. Or not dedicate, but try and find crossovers. But like the more rituals you give them, the easier it is going to be a draft. Especially the moment you go over 360, right? You need an even bigger mass of cards so that we actually open them. I don't know. As a very good example at the moment, I don't think like the Modo cube's got enough in there to support a Storm deck, sort of thing.
I don't think it's got any rituals apart from Dark Ritual, unless I'm
Dark
missing
Ritual,
something.
Cabal Ritual, Rite of Flame.
Right. Okay.
At the moment, and then your artifact mana. They've also dropped a lot of card draw, and keeping up card draw is something you want access to as well, especially the stuff that draws multiple cards in a turn. Even if that's just Charter Course or Night's Whisper, right? Just something to push your card advantage is going to be critical for your combo players in general. So yeah, I think the more of the mana you give them, the better, without just having so much that the pod is flooded with 15th pick rituals, sort of thing. And then the rest of it, I think you'd need Will, Breach, and or Past in Flames. You need a number of those or something to that effect. One of those big replay everything cards. The more Wheel of Fortunes you put in your cube, the better that is for the Storm player.
Yeah, I think adding Storm, you've got to be thinking through what the actual Storm turn is going to look like for the Storm deck, and do we have a decent amount of redundancy for all of those pieces? Plus, do we have tutors and card draw to go and find those things? So if we're doing the ritual Storm thing, we need enough rituals that the Storm player is going to reliably get a couple. That probably means you only need to open a couple, because it is kind of a nice thing about Storm is generally a lot of those rituals you can wheel, right? Like people aren't taking those cards from you most of the time. And I think ideally, you want to make sure that there's not like sort of single points of failure. You don't want it to be like, oh, Underworld Breach wasn't open, so the Storm deck doesn't really work. That's pretty bad. I think, like Wheels can do a lot of that, and probably like Wheels are already in a lot of cubes that aren't supporting Storm, right? So that's nice because cards that are great in Storm, but you can go a lot of other places with. Kind of similar with Fast Bond, I think. Massively helps the Storm player, but also good for other archetypes. And, we talked mostly about rituals, but there are, other ways you can go with that mana generation. You could put in a package with like Mana Flare, Heartbeat of Spring, High Tide, and ways to untap your lands, right? That's kind of another direction to go with it. Probably like a little less streamlined, so maybe not one for for super, super powerful cubes, but also the cards aren't as expensive. And if your cube is like gives a little more time to set up, I think that can be a pretty fun direction to go as well.
That blue-green style storm deck as well, where we're playing additional lands, even if it's exploration and fast bond redundancy for that sort of thing. But I always found those ones like the most fun storm decks to play. Like the ritual storm decks are cool, but a lot of lines are like deterministic. Once you found it, the game's over. You just have to execute it. But those, play my High Tide, play my Frantic Search, play my Time Spiral, and cross my fingers and do it again. And yeah, you're just wheeling and wheeling and wheeling, and then at some point you'll find something to do. And yeah, they're really good fun because a lot of the time those blue-green storm decks, when they start to go off, they are not deterministic. You're just making as much mana as you can off your fast bond or High Tide, and then pushing in some big effect, usually a wheel, usually a draw 7 of some variety. And that's quite fun. Just roll the dice and pray.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of got some upgrades since it's been like, I don't think we've had it much in Modo Cube since like Peregrine Drake's been a legal card, and that's a pretty good one for that deck, I imagine. And then you've still got your Frantic
Peregrine Drake.
Searches.
That's from like Urza's Saga.
It's like 50 years old, bro.
I mean, they just didn't put it in. Okay, I don't know when cards were printed.
Peregrine Drake's also not in the Modo Cube. What are you thinking about?
No. I was saying it hasn't been in the Modo Cube with Heartbeat, and that might be cool.
That could be cool, yeah. Hey.
Yeah, it's fine. If it's for versus Saga, you can cut that bit out.
It's printed in 1998.
I don't know.
It was
do
reprinted
I?
in Dominaria Masters.
It went into Pauper and then broke everything. I assumed that was when it was printed.
Right. Okay. No, it was downshifted in Eternal Masters.
But yeah, the other nice thing with the untap your lands Heartbeat sort of storm, right, is that the untap your land stuff can also go nicely with Tolarian Academy or Gaia's Cradle, and those are also cards that have really nice overlap with Storm. Like the Academy Storm decks can be pretty fun. It's like Tinker also works pretty well in most of your Storm decks, so that's kind of a nice overlap point.
Yeah, it makes sense. Kind of like the more that we're talking about it, because this is probably obvious to a lot of people, but kind of the more like I can see how you could build this as a archetype that you are supporting in like a peasant cube or a lower powered level cube. But just the more we're talking about it, the more it does make sense in a higher powered level cube, just because like, yes, you have the kind of core storm package of like or payoffs of like your Brain Freeze, your Tendrils, that kind of stuff. But like just the other cards around it are just cards you naturally see, like your tutors. You don't normally see many tutors outside of like higher power level cubes, like stuff like Bolos' Citadel, like these like Dream Halls, these big engine cards. You don't see those outside of higher power level cubes. So you guys kind of make sense. The kind of like, yeah, the more higher power level cube, it accentuates Storm basically. Or like I think kind of like the way I kind of went into this thinking of Storm as like, yeah, it is you cast some rituals, you cast a Tendrils, hooray, easy. But like it is much more of like a interweaving kind of like network of like this plus like I can get my mana from these cards interacting. I get my card draw from this selection of things, or I can use tutors as card draw, that kind of stuff. And then my payoffs can be anything I have my Storm cards as payoffs, but I also have other ways that can just abuse a large amount of mana. That's kind of, I guess, kind of, yeah, what one of my main takeaways from this is just like how I knew Storm was complicated before going into this, but I guess kind of like breaking it down into you have your card draw, you have your ramp, you have your payoffs. That's really helped me kind of understand it a little bit more.
And your payoffs are the important thing. It's just that somewhere at the end of the chain is going to be the card with the word Storm on it, right? Like, and that's usually quite a secondary thing. But I think if you want to fundamentally try and like break it down, it would be like, mana, search, and payoff, not too dissimilar to Reanimator being, search, discard, and reanimate. But it's just there's a lot more moving pieces on the way through, and I'm sure there's a way of making in your environment. There's a way of making just I'm supporting the Ritual Storm deck sort of thing, and that is across Grixis colors because that's usually where that sits. then you also might just be able to support a slightly blue-green, fast lands, draw 7, potentially Storm deck sort of thing. But the thing is that they also all go together quite nicely as well. So if you put all of that in, then...
Yeah, and I think the sort of the experience of drafting Storm, I think, is way more fun when there's like multiple avenues you can go, right? Within the environment, when it's like you're not just like, I'm drafting a Storm deck, I want it to look like exactly this, but there's multiple different ways that you can assemble a bunch of mana. I think kind of makes it more interesting. I want to cast a Palinchron again, man. That was so good.
I think that came out shortly after Peregrine Drake in 2018.
Yeah, same set, I think.
Very possibly. Yeah. I remember a deck with where the win condition was Palinchron, infinite mana, capsize all of your permanents off the infinite mana, and then win by attacking with Palinchron.
I've got a 4/5.
I want to do that again. Yeah. It timed out a lot, I will tell you that.
I remember you having a Storm deck where your Bowmaster got exiled, and it was very funny.
Yeah, that sounds like a spot I might not be able to win in. But that is the nice thing, right? Like you don't need the card that says Storm. Like it's fine if you can win with a Bowman, you can win with infinite mana or anything,
Yeah.
Like Bomberman's a cool one as well to win the game. We've not really talked about Bomberman, but that's quite a nice crossover. The Auric Salvagers stuff.
Auric Salvagers, yeah. Auric Salvagers is just another nice card. I think that's one of the cards which would drag you into white, right? We didn't really actually end up on that, but we've barely mentioned a white card today. I think Auric Salvagers is one that would get you into white because it goes off with your LED and your Lotus. But also, it combines it in with everything. Then, there's not many white cards we'd be interested in, right? I think the only one is like that and the Fairy Time Raveler.
You got no love for wing shards then?
Not really, no. No.
Reasonable.
Yeah. I go off and then I pass the turn, and now I can cast my wing shots.
Yeah. All right, just pulling it all together and just wrapping up a little bit now. So it's quite obvious that Storm is a very powerful deck. There is an element of like it's being supported less in some iterations of the Mitgo Vintage Cube recently. Do we think that's just because, how is Storm placed in a world where a lot more of the newer cards of Magic are play to the board, like creatures do things, you are we talked about at the start of the video in the Urza Sagas being restricted in Vintage because it was playing to the board potentially a little bit too much. Storm isn't something that like a lot of the design space that Magic is going down nowadays is doing things on the battlefield. The most powerful cards recently printed are Minsc and Boo, the Initiative. It's not like Storm payoffs, if that kind of makes sense. It's very rarely we get new things for this. How do you gents both see where Storm is placed? And what do you think the future of Storm is for Cube?
At the moment, it's not particularly playable outside of the Breach Freeze package. Over the last few iterations, the multi-card draw has gone from the Modo Cube at the moment. So we lost Charter Course, Factual Fiction, Treasure Cruise, Knight's Whisper. And these are all cards that you're always very interested in. The ones that put more cards in your hand than they cost, sort of thing. Like Preordain and Ponder are great, but because they're so cheap and so effective, the ones that actually put lots of cards in your hand have been a big loss for Storm. And I think a few of just the we lost the 2 red rituals as well at some point along the way. So you do need to get quite lucky to open things up to have Storm 2 actually work. Did they cut Dark Petition on the last update as well? I think that got dropped.
Yeah, I don't think Petition's in anymore.
Yeah, so I think actually if you're looking to draft Storm on...
Is
it? I haven't seen one for a while. The Dream Halls has been and gone. 1,000 Year Storm's been and gone. I think that one was a bit of a joke though, but it was really fun. They've also dropped High Tide and Turnabout and Peregrine Drake as well. Not that it's ever been in, but that sort of thing's all gone as well. We've just got Frantic Search, which is much more of a reanimator / Doomsday card, right? So I think if you're going to log online and try and build a combo deck using, quasi lessons from this sort of thing, then I think you'd probably have better success sitting down to try and draft a Doomsday deck, because it's fundamentally going to be very similar, where you're going to play some cantrips, make some mana, cast a payoff. But the Doomsday one is the one that's slightly more supported. But even then, losing Charter Course, Night's Whisper is also quite bad for that deck as well. But still.
I guess for a question I'd have to follow up, because I think they probably cut the Storm cards because they weren't getting played as much as some of the other cards, right? Do you think that... So obviously Storm isn't great in Mikko Vintage Huge Moon because they've cut a bunch of it. Do you think they were justified in cutting a bunch of it because it wasn't good enough? Or do you think that if you add those cards to your cube environment, if you've got a powered cube or like similar sort of cube, that Storm does still have the tools, if you add the right cards, to hang in the world of Minsk and Boo and For Failing Us and all that?
I think it can still hang, because it's one of those things I said for, I don't know, quite a while. I think if you have like a good Storm deck, you're just better than everything. And I think that would still be the case. If your opponent's sitting down to cast Minsk and Boos, even if they're on turn 3, if we've got a good Storm deck, they can play Minsk and Boo, hit us for 4. They can pump Minsk and Boo and hit us for 7. If we're on the play, we can untap for turn 5 and kill them, right? I know there's other things going on in the game of Magic, but I still think... I think if you're building a Storm deck that literally can't kill before turn 4, then maybe we're in a problematic spot anyway. But one note on them like dropping cards and stuff is they have said in the past that they were going to like try and do things in packages with Dream Halls and stuff being slightly more combo-y. So maybe at the moment we're in mid-range season or something, but it's been like that for most of this year. So I don't know. They dropped the package idea. I don't know, but...
Yeah, no, I'm sure Storm will come back to a certain extent. I kind of feel like a bunch of the reason it was dropped was just that, like, if 8 people do a draft on Mitko, I bet like 4 of them is 0% to draft Storm, however good or open it is.
I wouldn't dispute that. But one of the things is that having it there, the play experience from the one player in the 10 drafts that does it right is such a fun draft. If you're sitting down to force Storm like I regularly do, it's really fun. That's all I want to do, right? I'll pass a Palace Jailer. I don't care. It's slightly exciting to go and draft Storm. And it's just good fun. And I don't know, it's also harmed my win rate since they dropped it, but that's a different story for a different time, I think. But like, I think if you're like yourself, James, someone who wins a lot of cube, plays a lot of cube, but doesn't really touch the Storm deck until you're forced to, sort of thing, where it's like, okay, this is actually open and I've already got the pieces, and I've just got a 13th pick Yawgmoth Will, right? That 1 to 2 Storm drafts you do in a season, it is like a memorable evening of really good fun, right? So I think it's sad that it goes, because in my, combo-centric opinion, it's become a very mid-rangey, grindy fest without much outliers sort of thing. The most combo thing you can do at the moment is flashing an attractor, in my opinion, and that's not so fun as, yeah, sure, cards aren't as powerful, but the cube, maybe the whole cube level drops a little bit. If we just get to do a bunch of stupid nonsense, I think that's a bit more exciting for sitting down on a Wednesday evening after work. So, like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I actually totally agree. Like, I know I win less with the Storm decks from the other decks, so I don't draft them that much if it's a draft I'm really invested in winning. But I really like the experience of drafting Storm. It's a ton of fun because it makes you think a lot, like in a lot of ways where the other decks don't. Like with a Storm deck, you are playing with your whole deck.
Yes, your deck is in play,
which you basically aren't with, which you really aren't with any other deck in Cube. And that's a ton of fun. And it's just, it's such an outlier in the Cube drafting experience, right? Like your Storm drafts feel completely different to all your other drafts in playing them and in drafting them. And I think if you can get it into a cube, it does like add a lot to it. I think there's also the thing of like if you're building a cube, you presumably have like a rough play group in mind of people who are going to be playing it. And it's a pretty unfriendly archetype for beginners, I think, is it's pretty true of most Storm decks, right? Like maybe you throw it in and people learn, but it is something to bear in mind that it's a pretty like high complexity deck for people to draft.
No, I definitely agree with that, but I think, yeah, one thing you touched on there, which is very important, is that yeah, just because it's not supported in the Mitgo Vintage Cube right now, doesn't mean like that's not the only cube in town. Like, I know LSV does a lot of content, and I'm looking at his cube, and by God, there is a Storm package in there. There's an element of Storm in your cube, James. There's a little bit in mine, and kind of like Storm is always a package you can include. And if you're thinking of adding it to your cube, you'll probably know if your drafters will want it. They'll be slightly more combo orientated. If people have or just ask them, do you want something new? Do you want to try a new package? And if they're up for it, then yeah, add Storm to your cube, and you can play it with your friends.
I also think if you do add it to your like paper environment, you've got to let it lie for a while as well for a number of drafts, because it is one where sometimes you do need it to line up for a player at a pod or something like that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't think it's one where it's like you just leave it in for a few drafts and people didn't do it. Like in your cube, right, Dan, we've tried 87 different Selesnya themes, and it just turns out that no one drafts Selesnya. All right, it's fine. But
I've got a good feeling about counters, but yeah.
Have you? Yeah, right. That won't be me.
maybe.
But yeah, no, I think yeah, you probably just need to let it lie a bit, because there's probably going to be a draft where someone could have done it but just didn't commit, and instead audibled into a blue-black controlling mid-range deck, which is like one of your get-outs from Storm, is because you start your draft, you take an aggressive ritual and you Ogmoss Will, and then you see nothing else, and you take a mana leak. You know what I mean? But yeah, so and then I think you want to let it lie in your environment for a while, so that then it lets people see the cards come around, maybe even lets people see someone else draft it first, sort of thing.
No, definitely. Awesome. That makes sense. Right, I think that's where we're going to call it for today. Josh, thank you very much for joining us today. That was really insightful. Where can people find you online?
Is it at FiretruckModo on YouTube? Is it on YouTube? I think so, yeah. But FiretruckModo on YouTube. I mostly play Vintage, but I'm trying at the moment to increase my drop rate of videos. So a cube draft on a Tuesday and a Vintage League or event on Thursday. I'm also trying to increase the Vintage stuff as we approach UW season. So yeah, I'm trying to do 2 videos a week minimum at the moment. 1 cube, 1 Vintage.
Awesome. Yeah. I've seen you do some very dumb things on your channel. Go check him out. Yeah, all the links will be down in the description below. Go follow Josh. And James, pleasure as always. Thank you very much, man.
Yeah, always good.
Nice. Just leaves me to thank you all very much for listening. Do give the podcast a 5-star review, a thumbs up, tell a friend, all that good stuff. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, it's goodbye from Josh and James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye. Cool. All right. Welcome to the aftermath. Welcome to the real fans who kept listening after the closing music played out. We love you all. Last time we introduced a new segment where kind of afterwards we just have a little chat about something that's not magic. One thing I wanted to ask you, Josh. You've had your YouTube channel, FiretruckModo, plug on YouTube. You've had it for about a year or so now. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's about a year.
How have you found YouTube, and how have you found content creation, like in general?
Quite fun. It's quite rewarding at points. But how it started was just that people asked me for sideboard guides for Bazaar decks, and I was like, I'm not writing that. I don't know. I don't want to have to. I tried to sit down and write things, and I was like, you know what? I'd much rather actually just try and record videos of me explaining what I'm thinking, because it's far easier for me to talk through stupid lines than it is to write. I can't tell you exactly what to do in every spot in a Word document, right? But you might see me do enough things from vibes that when it comes up in your match, you work on it, so it works, sort of things. That's why it originally started. Have written some little sideboard guides in the past. well, now, but that's why it started.
Save those for the Patreon.
Yeah, I want to start one of those soon. That's my plan for this month or next. Probably this. Because I want to write sideboard guides. I want to get them on Patreon, and I want to get them on Patreon before EW starts.
And did you have any issues setting up your channel or anything like that?
One of the slight issues I have as a person when it comes to this sort of thing is I'm not the most tech savvy person you're ever going to meet. So just the whole process of make a video, cut pieces out of a video, bits where, I activate Bazaar into a Leovold sort of thing, and then swear for 5 minutes, that sort of thing. That side of things is definitely like a space that I need to try and improve on, but it's also, that side of things has also been a bit of a journey. I remember I had got, for most of my YouTube and tech side of things, I always come to you, a person who's seen a computer before. But no, I actually got taught how to gate videos by someone in a comment section once, like gate the audio so that all the background crap doesn't come through. Yeah, I found it okay. One of the things is that I don't know if I've had the fastest growing YouTube channel, partly because most of what I've done is vintage, right, which is very, very niche. Not many people partake in that format.
Magic itself is niche in the world of YouTube.
True. And then I've not gone outside of Magic YouTube though, right? So I don't know. And vintage is fairly niche viewing in Magic YouTube as well. Yeah, but it's okay. You ignore some comments.
Yeah,
like some others.
I've had some wild comments over the couple of years I've been doing it.
The thing is, I've never really had that because the vintage community is quite close, right? Not close, but like we know each other. We're mostly all in the Discord as well. We all play with each other. We chat with each other, right? So I don't get that too much from that side of things. The first time I had it was when I did my Vegas video, because that's something like my most popular video of all time is the Vegas draft, the one where I lose the finals to the Cube for Keeps. And that video's had been like my most viewed video, and it's got like 60 something, not 60, but like 30 odd comments on it. Which is quite a lot for me.
That's really good. That's really good, yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is that 15 of those comments are two people arguing about whether I'm good at Magic.
Well, screw them. You got to it's the people who've not got to anywhere near as close as that. Yeah.
I didn't interact with that, and it's just like, I don't know. And that was only 1,500 views, right, for a YouTube video, so it's not loads. So it's like that side of thing. I don't know if I'd get it. I don't think I'd get it from the vintage community at all, to be honest with you. But it's I don't know. That side of things can be a bit frustrating. But like most of my negative comments beforehand then have been like about the audio quality, which I think I've fixed. I've not had that for a good 8 months now.
I would say and everyone is all like the most critical person of your video is yourself. I've watched plenty of your videos. The quality is great. You are naturally more charismatic than I think you give yourself credit. You're very dry and very entertaining.
Yeah, that's one of the things I feel like I really struggle with is because I am, I don't know, like we can chat crap all day and it'll be fun, but then trying to chat crap with yourself all day is really difficult. And I don't know, I'm sure you guys get this a lot, but I'm a very draining person to be around a lot, right? So, just when you're making content on your own by yourself and you're me, it can be, No, I can't be critical of my own stuff, but getting my personality across on a solo endeavor is quite difficult, I find.
No, I completely agree with that. Like one of the reasons why I talked to James about starting this was doing something with another person, because most of my own channel stuff is me talking at a camera with no feedback, and then you put it online and that kind of stuff. And it is nice doing stuff with other people.
Dream piece of content for me on my exactly. It is nicer, but one of my dream pieces of content on my channel would be to be James drafting Storm, with me telling James how to win with Storm, but James finding a line that doesn't win with Storm. I think that's what I want. That's the main thing I want.
Or maybe just I draft Storm and then you like narrate in a different room where you point out all the winning lines that are available
Right, so
to me,
you-
and I manufacture one where I like make some mid-rangey 2-for-1.
That might be great actually. Is we draft Storm, you draft Storm, I commentate you drafting Storm, you deafened on the Discord call so you can't hear me. Yeah. Then we can have like 6 or 7 different lethal lines. You'll end up with a 2-2.
Yeah. It'll be great. And then we'll do a reverse one where I draft a red-black mid-range deck and you have to pilot it.
Yeah, cool. That's fine. Yeah. I mean, I'll have good outs to go 2-1 with a red-black mid-range deck.
That's true. I do not with Storm.
Yeah. One thing that actually did annoy me about YouTube, and this is like, I had a really fun, like, Simic wheeling deck. Like, wheels, lots of draw 7s in a Simic deck. Only way I could put Power and Toughness into play was basically in a Traxxas. So, most of the time that was going to be through a flash. So it wasn't great at winning. But yeah, and then I don't know, I just had like loads of audio problems that I couldn't solve through anything. So last night I drafted, and that video went out there, right? So I missed my Tuesday cube video sort of thing. And I was like, I want to sit down and I want to draft something fun. And my draft is like Mana Crypt Palace Jailer. And I was like, oh, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. YouTube's been cool. I enjoy it.
Yeah. I enjoy it as an outlet. I think the thing I'm quite bad at is I need to focus on it becoming an outlet again, rather like it is a creative endeavor for me, rather than something I'm going to like be holding my hat on, like and like chasing views and that kind of stuff. That's really something that kind of like
You release so many videos.
Yeah,
don't you do like
it's probably not a good thing.
daily wordles or something?
Yeah, well, daily shorts. Like so, like yeah, I do spellifies or I do pack one pick ones from Cube because I
You do
kind
pack one pick one from my cube.
Oh, the Blue Nothing Cube. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Oh, you definitely should.
That's it.
I apologize for the tank and
I feel like you'll get a lot of comments about what the fuck is this cube, but yes.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this cube all day, and last week you ended on saying, you drafted the Blue Nothing cube, and then no, we should organise another Blue Nothing cube.
Just finishing up on comments, are there any comments that stand out to you that you've received?
There's one that I always use as motivation to remember to like look at the audio, and it's also one that when this comment pops back up on my phone, I know I've responded to enough YouTube comments, okay, just because of the way the studio thing works on my phone. And it says this: I was looking for videos to see different sideboard plans, but could only endure 5 minutes of my man swallowing 1 litre of saliva per minute very close to the microphone.
Oh, don't worry about that. It's fine.
And I think it's very funny. And then, that was a few weeks later that someone then talked me through how to get a video in one of my comment sections. That's cool. So
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those people was more useful than the other.
It's funny though, but